During a somber funeral, a loyal German shepherd refuses to stop barking at the closed coffin, confusing mourners and leaving the entire church on edge. What happens next is a miracle no one could have imagined, and the secret revealed inside the coffin leaves the whole town speechless. Discover how the instincts and love of a German shepherd turned heartbreak into hope in this unforgettable story. Don't miss more unbelievable rescues and emotional German shepherd moments. Subscribe now for the next true story that will touch your heart. The day was supposed to be about silence, respect, and final goodbyes. St. Mark's Methodist Church, usually a place of hopeful weddings and gentle Sunday mornings, was thick with the scent of lilies and the buzz of whispered grief. Outside, the wind carried late autumn leaves down Cedar Falls' empty streets. Inside, every pew was filled with officers in blue, townsfolk in black, and friends who clung to each other for warmth against a cold that felt more spiritual than physical. Grace Parker stood near the front, her uniform crisp, her posture unyielding, a fortress for the storm that raged inside. She was known in Cedar Falls as the detective who never let her emotions cloud her judgment. Today, though, her eyes gave her away. Every time she glanced at the casket, her lips pressed together a little harder, fighting the urge to do something, anything, other than just stand there. But it was Atlas, Daniel Walker's canine partner, who broke the silence first. As the minister bowed his head to pray, a desperate howl sliced through the sanctuary. The sound was so raw it seemed to shake the stained glass windows, echoing off marble and wood. All eyes turned. Atlas, the massive German shepherd with a streak of silver along his muzzle, lunged at the coffin, claws scraping the polished surface. His tail bristled. He growled, then whined, a frantic, pleading sound that only someone who loved him could understand. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Some people recoiled, others reached for their phones. Grace's heart stuttered. She'd heard stories of dogs mourning their handlers, but this was different. There was terror in Atlas's voice, not just grief. A uniformed usher tried to pull Atlas away, but the dog twisted free, throwing his weight against the coffin with such force that the arrangement of white roses tumbled to the floor. "Somebody get that dog out of here!" barked an older officer from the back. "No, wait," Grace heard herself say, but the words caught in her throat. She remembered stories about Atlas, how he once dragged Daniel away from a collapsed warehouse seconds before the roof caved in, how he'd refused to let anyone approach a suspicious car that turned out to be rigged with explosives. Atlas had saved lives by listening to the things no one else could hear, see, or smell. Now, in front of hundreds of witnesses, he was warning them all, but about what? The minister tried to restore order. "Let us stop!" Grace's voice rang out, strong and sharp enough to silence the room. All heads turned toward her. She took a shaky breath, feeling the weight of expectation, the press of eyes. "I know how this looks, but Atlas has never acted without a reason. Not once. We need to open the casket." The funeral director, a gentleman named Mr. Hargrove, looked horrified. "Detective Parker, this isn't—" Grace locked eyes with him, and he faltered. "Please, for Daniel's sake, for all our sakes." A murmur of disagreement rolled through the crowd. Some thought it was blasphemy, others looked frightened. One old woman clutched her rosary, whispering prayers, but something about the way Atlas trembled, desperate, determined, begged belief. Finally, Mr. Hargrove nodded. With trembling hands, he lifted the casket lid. Atlas's hackles rose, but he fell silent, nose quivering as he pointed, not at Daniel's peaceful face, but at a strange, lumpy shape beneath the fold of the officer's uniform jacket. Grace moved closer, the world narrowing to a tunnel of light and shadow. Her hands shook as she reached in and gently pried the fabric back. The entire church seemed to stop breathing. There, tucked into the crook of Daniel's lifeless arm, was a golden retriever puppy, so small it could fit in two hands. The puppy's fur was matted and dirty, and it barely moved, except for a faint, desperate shiver. Swaddled in what looked like Daniel's old t-shirt, it was cold to the touch, breath coming in shallow, uneven gasps. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then the crowd exploded, voices overlapping in shock, horror, disbelief. How did... Is it alive? Why would Daniel... Grace cradled the tiny puppy, feeling the fragile heartbeat stuttering beneath her fingers. Atlas nosed the pup gently, letting out a soft, keening whine. "Somebody call a vet!" Grace barked, her detective voice returning full force. As an officer scrambled for his phone, Grace pressed her cheek to the puppy's head, fighting back tears. In that moment, grief collided with mystery. Why would Daniel hide a puppy in his coffin? How did it get there? And most importantly, what was he trying to tell them? As the puppy struggled for breath and Atlas refused to move from the side of the casket, Grace realized this funeral was not the end. It was the beginning of something no one in Cedar Falls would ever forget. The tension inside St. Mark's Church was electric, the air charged with confusion and something darker, fear, awe, maybe even hope. The congregation remained frozen, a tapestry of faces tight with disbelief as Grace stood there cradling the golden retriever puppy against her uniform. Atlas's breathing was ragged and urgent, his eyes never leaving the shivering bundle in her arms. The funeral director, Mr. Hargrove, still holding the casket lid open, looked as if he might faint. Several people edged forward, curiosity battling with dread. Grace's mind raced. The puppy was barely alive. Cold, limp, its breaths thin and ragged, body curled so tightly she could feel every bone. As Atlas whined again, a mournful, insistent sound, Grace felt her heart twist. She glanced down at Daniel, his face peaceful but now cast in strange, flickering shadows by the overhead lights. Whatever message he meant to leave had just changed everything. For a moment, time hung suspended, the church transformed into a stage set for a drama no one could have scripted. An older woman from the congregation stepped forward, voice trembling. "We have to do something. That baby won't make it much longer." Grace nodded, her jaw set. "Someone bring me a blanket and water, quickly." A flurry of movement broke the paralysis. Someone handed over a wool scarf. Someone else produced a plastic water bottle. The puppy's nose twitched at the scent of water, but when Grace touched a drop to its lips, the little mouth barely moved. The crowd was in turmoil now. Half the mourners pressed closer, desperate for answers, the other half hanging back as if afraid. Low voices traded wild speculation. Was it some kind of message? Did Daniel know something? Was the dog in danger? No one noticed, not even the funeral home. Mr. Hargrove spoke up, voice trembling. I swear we did everything by the book. The casket was sealed. We followed every protocol. There was nothing when we dressed him." Grace looked sharply at him. "Then someone placed her there after Daniel, but before the service, or maybe..." She stopped. That wasn't possible, was it? The logistics didn't add up. Unless Daniel... Her thoughts were interrupted by a young paramedic who'd arrived with the town's only animal crate. "We need to get her to the vet, now." But as they prepared to leave, Atlas blocked the way. He stood between Grace and the crowd, muscles coiled, making it clear. No one was taking the puppy from his sight. The tension was palpable, a standoff between instinct and human protocol. Grace kneeled beside Atlas, her hand on his back. "It's okay, boy. We'll go together, you and me." The dog seemed to understand. He fell into step at her side, eyes fixed on the puppy, never once looking away. As Grace moved, the congregation parted, murmurs trailing behind her. Even now, some people frowned, muttering about spectacle, about disrespect for the dead. Others stared at Grace as if she were the only person left in the world who could make sense of the chaos. She caught sight of Daniel's mother, Martha, standing near the front pew, her face a mask of shock. Their eyes met. For a moment, Grace saw her own confusion reflected back, a silent plea for explanation, for hope. Outside, the air was sharp, slicing through Grace's uniform. The police car waited at the curb, its lights off, but engine running. She slid in, Atlas leaping into the back, refusing to let the crate out of his sight. The puppy let out a weak sigh and went limp, but Grace could still feel that faint, fluttering heartbeat. They tore through Cedar Falls' winding streets, sirens blaring. Rain had begun to fall, spattering the windshield with cold drops. Grace drove one-handed, cradling the puppy against her chest, murmuring soft encouragement she'd never say to another human being. At the clinic, chaos reigned. The vet, Dr. Willis, met them at the door, eyes widening when she saw the scene. A police detective, a famous K9, and a dying puppy bundled in a funeral shirt. Dr. Willis snapped into action. Inside now. Atlas, stay back. Grace, keep talking to her. Keep her awake. The exam room was harshly bright. Grace laid the puppy on the table, hands shaking. Atlas circled restlessly, whining low and deep. The puppy's eyes fluttered open just long enough to meet Grace's gaze, a look so full of fear and innocence it nearly broke her. Dr. Willis worked quickly, inserting an IV, wrapping the puppy in heated towels, checking for injuries. She's severely hypothermic, dehydrated. Whatever happened to her, it was bad. We'll do what we can. Grace stood by the table, feeling helpless. She caught her own reflection in the glass of a supply cabinet. Hair disheveled, uniform stained, face drawn tight with grief and something else. Anger. She'd lost Daniel, but she'd be damned if she lost this puppy too. Atlas refused to move from the table, paws pressed to the edge, head down, nose close to the tiny golden form. Every few moments he'd emit a rumble, not a growl, but something gentler, a kind of song. Dr. Willis shot Grace a look. He's not going to leave, is he? Grace shook her head. No, he knows something. He always does. As the minutes ticked by, the waiting room outside filled with whispers. News had already begun to spread, the funeral, the puppy, the canine's howl. Grace overheard voices. Did Daniel really? Why was the dog hidden? What does it mean? Maybe Atlas is trying to tell us something. Maybe there's more to this. Atlas's gaze was unwavering. The puppy's breaths grew shallower, each one a struggle. Grace pressed her hand against the table, silent tears slipping down her cheeks. The weight of the town's questions settled on her shoulders. She realized that this wasn't just about grief or even about Daniel. It was about truth and about listening to the voices no one else wanted to hear. The revelation of the puppy, hidden and barely alive, had cracked something open. Daniel's last act wasn't just about death. It was about protecting a secret, a life so fragile it could have been lost with a single oversight. Now, everyone would have to ask, why was she there, and how did no one notice? As Grace whispered a silent promise to the struggling puppy, she felt Atlas's nose nudge her elbow, a reminder that the story wasn't over, not for Daniel, not for Atlas, and certainly not for this golden scrap of life fighting to survive. 3 days before the funeral, a westbound wind blew hard across Highway 46. The sky that day was wide and blue, the Colorado mountains visible through a veil of late autumn haze. Patrol car 234 rolled slow along the shoulder, headlights on even in daylight, dust curling behind like a ghost. Officer Daniel Walker tapped the steering wheel, humming a broken tune, while Atlas rested in the back, dark eyes alert to the passing world. A call crackled over the radio, but Daniel only half listened. Routine traffic, nothing urgent. It was the sight up ahead that caught his attention, a cardboard box, battered and soggy from last night's rain, sitting just off the rumble strip. Daniel's foot eased onto the brake. Atlas shifted, ears pricked. Daniel knew better than to ignore things left by the roadside. He'd seen too much, the way people tossed their secrets, or their guilt, onto the shoulders of highways. With a sigh, he pulled over and flipped on his hazard lights. The wind hit hard as he stepped out. Crows scattered from the fence posts, watching with suspicious eyes. Daniel moved slowly, boots crunching gravel, hand on his belt. The box was too still, too small to be trash. As he drew closer, the smell hit him first. Wet fur, something sour and sharp beneath it. Daniel crouched, Atlas standing sentry by his side, and carefully peeled back a corner of the lid. A single golden puppy blinked up at him, eyes wide with terror. She was tangled in an old blue t-shirt, shivering so badly that her whole body rattled. Daniel's heart kicked. He reached in gently, hands steady, and pulled the puppy to his chest. Behind her, another shape, her mother, unmistakably still and cold. Daniel swallowed hard. He'd seen worse, but every loss like this was its own kind of violence. Atlas moved in, nose working furiously. He licked the puppy's ear, a gesture so soft and deliberate that Daniel felt a catch in his throat. For a long moment, Daniel stood there, letting the puppy's panic soak into his skin. She whined, mouth opening in a silent cry, then tried to bury herself deeper in the shirt. Atlas whined too, glancing up at Daniel as if to say, "What now?" Daniel knew what the book said. Call animal control, log the evidence, let the system do its job. But the book didn't know Atlas, didn't know what it was like to see the world through the eyes of someone who'd been abandoned once too. He dialed a number from memory. Grace answered on the second ring, her voice brisk, already knowing something was wrong. "What's up, Walker?" Daniel's words were softer than usual. "Found a puppy, Highway 46. She's in rough shape. Her mom's gone." There was a pause, then Grace's voice warmed, quieter now. "You know you're supposed to call it in." "I know." Daniel's gaze drifted to Atlas. "But I can't. Not after. You remember Atlas, don't you? Day we found him, same highway. He'd been there all night waiting for someone to come back." Grace let the silence stretch. Finally, she said, "Do you think she'll make it?" Daniel glanced at the puppy, her body limp in his arms, heartbeat erratic. "I don't know, but I have to try. Bring her in. I'll meet you at the clinic. And Walker." "Thank you." He hung up, pressing the phone to his forehead for a moment before sliding it away. Atlas pawed at his leg, impatient. Daniel bundled the puppy up and set her on the passenger seat, wrapping her in his own jacket, careful not to let her out of sight. Atlas curled protectively beside her, head on the seat. The drive to the clinic felt endless, every bump and jolt a fresh worry. Daniel glanced in the rear view, watching Atlas. The shepherd's gaze was fixed on the puppy, every muscle tense. He remembered the first night he'd brought Atlas home, just a scrawny pup then, more ribs than fur, but already fierce in his loyalty. As they drove, Daniel talked to them both, soft words, half lullaby, half confession. "You know, Atlas, I promised I'd never let this happen to you again. I guess that promise has to stretch a little further." Atlas thumped his tail, and for a second Daniel let himself believe everything might turn out all right. At the clinic, Grace was waiting, jacket thrown over her shoulders, worry etched across her face. She didn't say anything about protocol. She just opened the door and let them in. The puppy barely whimpered as Grace checked her pulse, her hands careful and practiced. "She's fighting, but it's bad," Grace said. "What was she doing out there alone?" Daniel shook his head, voice tight. People can be cruel, but not all of us." He sat with Atlas while Grace spoke quietly to Dr. Willis. Every so often, Atlas would nose the puppy, humming a low, comforting tune that Daniel had never heard before. Daniel closed his eyes, letting the memory of another day, another rescue, wash over him. Later, as the clinic lights dimmed, Daniel knelt beside Atlas, hand on the dog's broad back. "You remember what it was like, huh? All that waiting?" "You were just a kid yourself." Atlas nudged Daniel's chin, then pressed his nose to the puppy's side, as if passing on some old secret only dogs understand. Grace watched from the doorway, arms crossed, smile gentle. "You've got a knack for finding lost things, Walker." Daniel shrugged, a crooked grin breaking through the fatigue. "Maybe, or maybe I just can't leave well enough alone." Grace shook her head, affection in her eyes. "No, that's not it. You see what needs saving, and you do it, even when no one else would." Daniel looked at the puppy, so tiny in Atlas's shadow. "I'll get her to safety, I promise." But fate had already started moving, silent and unseen, changing everything. Some promises Daniel would never have the chance to keep. Night pressed against the windows of Cedar Falls Animal Clinic, turning the glass into black mirrors. The storm that had threatened all afternoon finally broke, rain pelting the parking lot in angry sheets. The waiting room was lit by harsh fluorescent lights, but every shadow seemed deeper, every noise amplified in the tense hush that had settled over Grace, Atlas, and the battered golden puppy they'd found at Daniel's funeral. Atlas sat pressed close to the metal cage where the puppy now lay, his big body curled as tight as he could make it, one paw extended through the bars as if he could keep the little dog anchored in the world by touch alone. He didn't whine anymore. Instead, a heavy, dogged silence radiated from him, unmovable, absolute. Rainwater still clung to his fur, but he refused to be toweled off, refused even the treat Dr. Willis had offered. He had one purpose now, and no comfort for himself could matter. Grace slumped on the plastic chair nearby, elbows on knees, hands tangled together so tightly her knuckles showed white. For the first time in years, her composure had cracked, and she couldn't put it back together. She watched the cage, her chest tight, her breath shallow. The puppy was little more than a golden scrap in the corner, swaddled in Daniel's old t-shirt. With every shallow rise and fall of the pup's side, Grace fought the urge to reach in, to do something, anything, but she'd learned by now the limits of her control. A flash of memory stabbed through her. Daniel's voice on the phone, rough with sleep, the night he found Atlas years ago. "He's hurt, but he's holding on. Can't leave him here, Grace. He keeps looking at me like I'm supposed to fix it." Now, Atlas was the one looking at her, and the feeling was so familiar it stung. She wondered if this was how Daniel had always felt, like the world was broken, and fixing it meant letting yourself be broken too. Thunder rattled the building. Dr. Willis entered, sleeves rolled to her elbows, hair escaping its ponytail. Her voice was low, urgent. "Her temperature's dropping. We're doing all we can, but it's not good. Unless we can warm her up, she won't last the night." A beat of silence. Grace blinked, hard, holding back something sharp in her chest. "Do whatever you have to. I'll stay." Atlas nudged the cage door, insistent. Dr. Willis hesitated, watching the dog's steady, mournful stare. "He hasn't left her side for a second, not even when I checked her vitals. It's like he understands." Grace forced a small, bitter laugh. "He always does. Atlas doesn't forget a thing." She leaned her head against the wall, letting her eyes close for a moment. The storm outside was relentless. Inside, her mind filled with scenes she couldn't escape. Daniel holding the puppy by the roadside, his hands trembling but gentle. Daniel at the station, smiling through exhaustion, saying he just wanted to help one more lost soul. She remembered the last conversation they'd had, her insisting he get some rest, him waving her off, always the hero. Now, sitting in this stark, chilly room, guilt gnawed at Grace. She should have done more, insisted Daniel let her take the puppy home herself, offered to help instead of trusting that things would work out. How many times had she told herself that everyone needed to fight their own battles? Atlas shuffled restlessly, nose pressed to the cold metal bars. Every few minutes he'd let out a breathy huff, glancing at Grace as if begging her to act, to fix what was broken. The puppy shivered, breath rattling in the too still air. Across the room the receptionist whispered into her phone, trying not to disturb them. The world felt suspended. 3 lives connected by a thread of hope, fear, and grief that threatened to snap with every passing second. Grace got up and paced, arms wrapped tight around her chest. She stopped beside the cage, kneeling to Atlas's level. "You remember when Daniel found you, right? You made it because he didn't give up. You were both stubborn." Her throat closed on the words, but she forced them out. "Don't you let go now, Atlas. She needs you. I need you." Atlas pressed his forehead to the bars, eyes locked on the puppy. Grace reached in and stroked the pup's ear, careful not to wake her. The tiny body was frighteningly cold. Dr. Willis returned, bringing another blanket, her face grim. "Grace, I have to be honest. She's fighting, but if her temperature doesn't rise soon, there's not much more we can do." "I'm sorry." The words hit Grace like a punch. She nodded, swallowing the pain. "Thank you for trying." Silence again. Grace sank back onto the chair, tears slipping down her cheeks, burning hot. Atlas kept his vigil. For a long time, the only sound was the puppy's ragged breathing, the storm outside, and the quiet heartbreak of a room that didn't know how to hope. Hours crawled by. Dr. Willis checked on them, offered coffee, tried to comfort Grace. Atlas wouldn't move, not for food, not for rest, not for anything. He pressed closer every time the puppy whimpered, a guardian against the dark. Grace drifted between exhaustion and memory, haunted by Daniel's face, by all the things she hadn't said, all the things she'd left unfinished. She was supposed to be the strong one, the one people leaned on, but now she felt hollow, useless. And yet, through the ache, through the storm and the fear, there was a kind of connection growing in the quiet, between Grace and Atlas, both grieving in different languages, between Atlas and the puppy, a survivor promising safety to the lost. As dawn threatened the edges of the sky, the puppy was still alive, but only just. The vet's words echoed in Grace's mind. Not much more we can do. But Atlas refused to give up. He pressed closer, humming his strange, low song, and Grace, watching them, wondered if hope could be enough to keep a broken heart beating for just one more day. The storm outside refused to let up. Thunder rolled across Cedar Falls, shaking the windows of the animal clinic with every low, angry growl. The clock above the front desk ticked toward midnight, its second hand crawling in a world that felt stopped in place. Grace sat hunched in a faded blue chair, palms pressed to her forehead, sleep an impossible luxury. In the next room, Dr. Willis and her tired assistants worked in tense silence, checking the golden puppy's temperature, swapping out the warmed IV fluids, monitoring the smallest flickers of life. Atlas hadn't moved all night. The big shepherd's fur was still damp, dark patches spreading across the tile from his heavy paws. He was pressed so close to the puppy's kennel that his side fogged the glass with every breath. Now and then he'd lean in, touching his nose to the metal as if he could will the warmth back into the tiny golden body inside. The world outside had gone quiet, the kind of hush that only comes with exhaustion and waiting. Grace stared into the darkness, replaying every moment since the funeral. Atlas's desperate howl, the shock of the puppy hidden in Daniel's arms, her own decision to break protocol. She wondered what Daniel would say if he could see them now, fighting for a life he'd tried so hard to save. The puppy's breaths were so soft they barely moved the blanket Daniel had wrapped around her. Atlas watched, unblinking. Dr. Willis came out again, rubbing her eyes, voice hushed. She's colder. I'm sorry, Grace. We're losing her. Unless something changes soon. Grace bit her lip, pushing down a wave of helpless anger. She couldn't accept another loss, not tonight, not after Daniel, not after all the promises she'd made to herself and to Atlas. She pulled out her phone, thumb trembling, and dialed Daniel's mother. Martha Walker answered after 3 rings, voice groggy but clear. Grace? Is it about the puppy? Grace's words came out in a rush, laced with raw fear. Martha, she's not going to make it unless we do something. The vet's tried everything. Atlas won't leave her side. I don't know what else to do. A pause. Martha's voice softened, steady even in heartbreak. Let Atlas in with her. Dogs know how to heal each other. Daniel always said that's what saved Atlas. Back when you first found him, body warmth, heartbeat, a friend, just let him try. Grace nodded, wiping her eyes. Thank you. She hurried back, finding Dr. Willis at the puppy's cage, preparing another dose of warm saline. The protocol says, the vet began, but Grace cut her off with a look that left no room for debate. Let Atlas in, please, if there's even a chance. Atlas needed no encouragement. The moment the door to the kennel opened, he crawled in and curled himself around the shivering bundle. His tail flicked softly, gently nudging the puppy closer with every breath. Grace knelt by the open door, watching as Atlas hummed a low, broken song. Half whine, half memory, a tune she'd heard only a handful of times, always when he was most afraid or most hopeful. The puppy's small body nestled into Atlas's belly, drawn by the deep, steady warmth. Her breaths, though still shallow, slowed a little, taking on the rhythm of Atlas's heartbeat. The room filled with the sound of the dog's low lullaby and the steady patter of rain against glass. Grace pressed her hand to the kennel's side, feeling the hum in her bones. You're not alone, sweetheart. Not while Atlas is here. Not while I'm here. For the first time since Daniel's funeral, she let herself hope, just a little, just enough to see through the exhaustion and fear. Atlas's presence changed the air, the temperature, the story itself. Even the vet's assistant stood quietly at the door, watching the unlikely scene unfold. As the hours dragged on, Grace drifted in and out of a light doze, jolted awake every time Atlas shifted. Each time she checked the puppy's chest, and each time she found the fragile rise and fall that meant the fight wasn't over. Outside, the storm broke, rain giving way to a faint, bruised dawn. A gasp from one of the assistants broke the silence. "Look!" The puppy was stirring, ears twitching, paws flexing, muzzle rooting against Atlas's belly in search of comfort. Dr. Willis leaned in, checking vitals, her expression slowly shifting from grim to astonished. "She's warming up," Dr. Willis breathed, her heart rate stronger. She's coming back." Atlas let out a deep sigh, eyes closing as if only now could he allow himself to rest. Grace blinked away tears. She reached in, fingers stroking the puppy's now warm fur. "You did it, Atlas. You kept your promise." Sunrise crept over the town, lighting the clinic in pale gold. For the first time since the funeral, the oppressive weight in Grace's chest loosened, replaced by something lighter, gratitude, relief, and a fierce love that needed no words. When Dr. Willis came back with fresh towels and a bottle, her hands shook as she worked. "She's going to need time. But if she made it through this night, she's got a real shot. I can't believe it." The staff, toughened by years of loss and bad news, stood quietly by the door, some brushing at their eyes, others just watching Atlas and the puppy with reverence. Word spread quickly, first to Martha, then through the town. By breakfast, the story was already growing, gathering meaning like all the best stories do. Atlas the hero, Grace the relentless, a little golden life brought back from the brink. But in the quiet of the clinic, with Atlas still humming and the puppy sleeping pressed to his heart, Grace knew the real miracle wasn't in cheating death. It was in the promise that hope, if guarded fiercely enough, could light even the darkest night. The first Monday after the storm, Cedar Falls Police Headquarters was almost unnaturally quiet. Outside, the world seemed new-washed, the air sharp, leaves plastered to the sidewalks, clouds breaking up just enough to let in pale morning sun. Grace pulled her squad car into the back lot, killing the engine and listening for a moment to the faint sound of birds. It felt wrong, that kind of peace, after so much chaos. She glanced into the back seat. Atlas rode with her, not as an officer anymore, but as a companion, his big head resting on the armrest, watching every move. In the passenger footwell, the puppy, still nameless, still fighting, slept in a carrier bundled with towels and Daniel's old t-shirt. Grace's fingers lingered on the carrier for a moment. The memory of Atlas's night-long vigil at the clinic still haunted her. The sound of his low, broken song would never leave her. Inside, the station felt hollow. Daniel's absence clung to every shadow and empty chair. Grace walked the halls with Atlas at her side, nodding silently to colleagues who averted their eyes, unsure what to say. In her office, she found the stack of files Daniel had left on his desk, case notes, a traffic ticket, and a coffee cup with lipstick on the rim, a joke from one of the admin staff. She set her bag down, took a steadying breath, and got to work. Her mind wouldn't settle. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Daniel's hand curled protectively around the puppy in that casket. She remembered Atlas's howl, the way the town had gasped when the secret was revealed. There were questions that needed answers: how the puppy ended up with Daniel, what he was trying to protect, and above all, what message he wanted to leave behind. She started with the patrol car. Daniel's personal car had already been combed for clues by forensics, but Grace needed to see for herself. The cruiser sat alone in the back lot, washed clean by rain. She unlocked the door and slid inside, the familiar scent of leather and dog fur filling her lungs. For a long moment, she just sat. The dashboard still showed a dried smear of mud where Daniel's hand must have slipped. A faint, lingering smell of Daniel's cologne drifted in the closed space, a scent that brought with it a rush of regret and longing. Atlas pressed his nose to the driver's seat, breathing in deeply, tail wagging slow and uncertain. Grace scanned the interior. Fast food wrappers, a map book with notes scribbled in Daniel's tight handwriting, and a stack of police forms clipped to the sun visor. She was about to give up when her eyes landed on the glove box. Slightly ajar, a corner of paper peeking out. She reached for it, heart pounding. Inside was a folded sheet, creased and dirty. Across the top in Daniel's writing, "If anything happens, make sure she gets a chance." Beneath a brief inventory, towels, a heating pad, a bottle of electrolyte water, all the things he'd used to keep the puppy alive during those desperate hours. Grace stared at the note, the truth sinking in. Daniel hadn't just rescued the puppy. He'd gone out of his way to protect her, thinking of every detail, planning for every possibility. Her throat tightened as she read the last line, barely legible. "She's worth saving. Promise me." A wave of emotion broke through, pride and heartbreak in equal measure. Atlas, restless, nosed at a bag on the passenger floorboard. Grace opened it and found evidence bags. The puppy's original blue t-shirt, a cracked bowl, a heating pad still warm from the battery inside. All of it spoke to Daniel's care, his stubborn refusal to give up on the smallest, weakest creature he'd found. Grace sat back, letting the truth fill the silence. Outside, the world kept moving, squad cars coming and going, radios chattering, the mundane rhythms of police life. Inside the car, time felt suspended. Her phone buzzed. A message from Detective Ruiz, lead on Daniel's shooting. The shooter had confessed to firing in a panic, but the details were hazy. What stood out was one line in the interview transcript. "He threw himself in front of the dog, wouldn't let me get close, kept yelling to stay back." Grace's hands trembled. Daniel had died protecting the puppy, shielding her with his own body in those final moments. Every choice he'd made, every risk, had been about giving her a chance, the one thing he couldn't do for himself. She drove back to the station, the weight of the note heavy in her pocket. Inside, she called Martha Walker. Her voice was rough with fatigue, but warm, grateful. "He made sure she'd be safe, Martha, even at the end." He didn't give up on her. There was silence on the line. Then Martha spoke, voice breaking. "That sounds just like Daniel. He never walked away, not from anyone who needed help. Thank you, Grace. Thank you for seeing it through." Later that afternoon, the department held a small gathering in the squad room. Coffee, cookies, old friends. Grace told the story, her voice clear but shaking. She spoke of Daniel's courage, his compassion, his insistence that every life mattered, no matter how small or wounded. Atlas sat at her feet, the puppy bundled in Grace's lap. Officers who'd never cried at a funeral wiped their eyes. When Grace finished, she pressed the note into Martha's hand. "We'll keep our promise," she said quietly. "She'll get her chance." The department bowed their heads in silent respect. Daniel's legacy wasn't a medal, or a plaque, or a newspaper headline. It was this: a dog's loyalty, a puppy's fragile life, and the community's promise to carry kindness forward. Atlas nuzzled the puppy, a soft, hopeful rumble in his chest. Grace reached down, scratching behind his ears, letting her own tears fall at last. For the first time since the funeral, she felt something like peace. Daniel's last message had been heard, and Cedar Falls would never be the same. Rain had given way to sunlight by the time the day of Daniel Walker's memorial arrived, painting the streets of Cedar Falls in a hopeful gold. Yet the town felt changed, quieter, gentler, as if everyone moved with the weight of loss and the strange, shimmering promise of new beginnings. On Main Street, the flag flew at half-mast. Shopkeepers placed bouquets in their windows. At the church steps, children drew chalk hearts and paw prints on the concrete, their hands stained with color, and their voices hushed with the seriousness of grown-up grief. Grace Parker arrived early. She wore a pressed uniform but left her badge in her pocket. Today wasn't about authority, it was about memory and meaning. Atlas walked at her side, head high, eyes alert, his coat brushed to a dull shine that could not hide the scars of his years on the job. The golden puppy, now called Sunny by popular vote, though Grace still sometimes whispered miracle when no one was listening, trotted beside Atlas, fluffy and uncertain, tail wagging with cautious hope. Inside the church, the pews filled with townspeople, Grace felt the shift as she entered. Hushed voices, hands reaching out, murmurs of "Thank you, detective," and "He would be so proud." She nodded, letting their kindness settle on her shoulders, heavy and sweet. The ceremony began with music, then the slow reading of Daniel's favorite poem, then a string of hesitant, honest memories from colleagues and friends. Grace felt the ache of loss settle in her chest, but beneath it was something else: pride. Each story painted Daniel as he truly was: imperfect, stubborn, unfailingly kind. When it was her turn to speak, Grace rose slowly, pausing for a breath at the podium. She looked out at the crowd and saw faces glistening with tears, saw Martha sitting straight-backed with Sonny in her lap, and saw Atlas curled protectively at her feet. The sight filled her with both longing and courage. Daniel was a man who believed that every life mattered, Grace began, her voice soft but steady. He proved it, not just with words but with choices. When most people would walk away from something small, messy, or broken, Daniel stepped closer. He taught me, and so many of us, that you don't need to be fearless to be brave. You just have to care enough to act. She glanced down at Atlas and Sonny, finding strength in their quiet vigilance. "What you may not know," she continued, "is that Daniel's last act wasn't just about duty or heroism. It was about love. He gave everything to protect a tiny, helpless creature because he believed in second chances, in redemption, in hope." There was a ripple of emotion in the crowd. Children pressed closer to their parents. Old men wiped their eyes with calloused hands. "Today," Grace said, "we don't just say goodbye. We make a promise to remember, to honor, and to carry his spirit forward." Atlas and Sonny are living proof of what Daniel stood for. They're not just symbols, they're family. And like Daniel, they remind us that it's never too late to do what's right, no matter the cost. She stepped back, voice faltering as applause broke out. It wasn't loud. This was Cedar Falls, after all. But it was heartfelt, and it carried the weight of a community changed. The memorial moved outside to the park across from the church, where a new plaque waited beneath a sheet of blue velvet. The mayor, Martha, and a group of children gathered around. Atlas pressed close to Martha's leg, Sonny circling his paws, emboldened by the gentle press of Atlas's nose to her side. Martha lifted Sonny into her arms, her face wet with tears but lit by the soft glow of pride. When the cover was drawn back, the crowd gasped. A bronze sculpture of Daniel kneeling, hand extended to touch Atlas's head. Next to him, a golden puppy looked up, eyes wide with trust. The plaque read, "Walker Atlas Park, in memory of those who serve, protect, and heal." Children came forward with wildflowers, laying them at the base. Martha held Sonny close, whispering words Grace couldn't hear but felt in her bones. For a moment, the whole town seemed to pause, a single breath held in unity and hope. A local reporter, microphone trembling, asked Martha if she'd like to say something. Martha nodded, clearing her throat. "My son loved two things above all else: helping others and believing in miracles," she said, voice breaking and true. Atlas and Sonny, these two lives, are Daniel's miracles. This park isn't just for remembering, it's for healing, for laughter, for hope. Atlas sat at Grace's feet, finally calm, his eyes turned toward the sculpture as if he understood what it meant. Sonny curled beside him, already at home. As the sun slipped behind the hills, the crowd lingered, sharing stories and laughter. A sense of peace settled over Cedar Falls, woven through with the pain of loss and the beauty of resilience. People hugged, made plans for coffee, promised to help with the new rescue fund in Daniel's name. The town had been changed, not by violence or tragedy, but by love, loyalty, and the quiet, persistent power of kindness. Daniel's final act had become a spark, lighting the way for others. Later, when the crowds had thinned and the light faded to gold, Grace walked the edge of the park, Atlas and Sonny flanking her. She felt the ache of grief, but also, at last, the hope of healing. Daniel's story had become Cedar Falls' story, a testament to the truth that love, once given, lives on, changing the world one gentle act at a time. Months passed in Cedar Falls, the sharp grief of Daniel's loss softening into something quieter, but no less powerful. a presence that lingered in the corners of rooms, in the way neighbors spoke to one another, in every kind gesture that seemed to ripple outward from that autumn. The air grew cold, and then, as spring crept back, the town felt lighter. For Martha Walker, healing was not a straight line. It was measured in small, imperfect steps, each one marked by the rhythm of paws on hardwood floors and the warm weight of living creatures beside her. Martha had adopted Atlas and Sunny. At first, she told herself it was only until she found the right new home. But the truth was, she needed them as much as they needed her. Every morning, Martha woke before sunrise. Her hands, rough from years of baking and gardening, would reach down to find Atlas already waiting, his great head pressed to her knees, eyes gentle and knowing. Sunny would leap up with clumsy puppy joy, racing circles around Atlas, nipping at his tail, never quite believing her luck at having survived. The house felt different now. Daniel's absence was still there, his boots by the door, the hat he always tossed on the kitchen table, his battered old mug with the words, "World's okayest cop." But those reminders hurt less with each day. Instead, laughter returned to the kitchen. Martha found herself humming as she worked, sharing scraps of toast with Sunny, talking to Atlas as if he were a wise old friend who'd seen it all. In some ways, he was. Grace became a frequent visitor, often dropping by in the evenings after her shift. She'd bring stories of the department, an extra coffee for Martha, a new chew toy or collar for Sunny. These nights, the women would sit on the porch while Atlas watched over the yard, Sunny sprawled between them, belly exposed in perfect, shameless trust. Sometimes, when the sky went violet with dusk, Grace and Martha would talk about Daniel, his stubbornness, his terrible jokes, the time he let Atlas eat half a Thanksgiving turkey before anyone noticed. Other nights, they said nothing, letting the silence between them do its own quiet work of repair. One Thursday, a knock at the door brought a surprise. A crew from a documentary film company, cameras slung over their shoulders, faces open and earnest. "We heard about Atlas and Sunny," the producer explained, "and how your town honored Officer Walker. We'd love to film a segment about their story, about how animals can heal a community and each other." Martha hesitated, but Grace squeezed her hand. "It's a good story, Martha. People need hope." The documentary crew filmed for a week. They captured Martha baking bread, Atlas resting his chin on her lap as she kneaded dough. They filmed Sunny's wild puppy races through the garden, tumbling into flower beds, rolling in the grass until she looked more green than gold. Grace was interviewed in the park, the new statue gleaming behind her, sunlight catching in her hair as she spoke of second chances, of the ways broken things could mend. When the documentary aired online, it went viral almost overnight. Messages poured in from across the country, people thanking Martha for her courage, officers sharing stories of their own canine partners, children mailing hand-drawn cards to Atlas and Sunny. Local news stations showed up to film Atlas and Sunny playing fetch, the story of loss and healing capturing the hearts of strangers and neighbors alike. With fame came something unexpected, a movement. Inspired by Daniel's legacy and the visible healing of Martha, Atlas, and Sunny, Cedar Falls residents organized fundraisers for the local animal rescue. A town-wide adoption fair was held in the new Walker Atlas Park, drawing families from miles around. Dogs and cats found new homes. Retired canines were given honorary badges and pampered by schoolchildren who once feared their sharp barks. Martha, for the first time in years, felt a sense of purpose that ran deeper than memory. She became the unofficial ambassador for the cause, writing letters to families thinking about adoption, helping the shelter staff on weekends, giving talks at the elementary school about kindness, loss, and resilience. She was never comfortable in the spotlight, but with Atlas by her side and Sunny curled at her feet, she found herself able to do things she never would have imagined. One evening, as she finished reading a letter from a family in Maine who'd adopted an old beagle thanks to Daniel's story, Martha sat on her porch and watched the sunset bleed pink across the horizon. Atlas sat beside her, breathing slow and deep. Sunny, older and stronger now, rested her head on Martha's foot, sighing in perfect contentment. Grace arrived, letting herself in with the ease of family. She handed Martha a steaming cup of tea, then sat beside her, shoulders brushing in silent solidarity. "Did you ever imagine," Grace said softly, "that things could feel like this again?" Martha looked at her, eyes shining. "I didn't dare hope, but maybe that's what Daniel wanted all along, for us to keep hoping, even when it hurts." They sat in the golden quiet, the past and present folding gently together. Atlas watched the yard, always vigilant, but his gaze was softer now. Sunny dreamed puppy dreams at Martha's feet, her future wide open. In Cedar Falls, wounds did not vanish. They became new roots, new stories, new bonds. And as night settled in, the house at the corner of Main and Spruce was filled not with loss, but with life. The kind of life that grows, heals, and reaches outward, forever changed by the ones who came before. Night fell soft and silent over Cedar Falls, settling like a quilt on the small house at the corner of Main and Spruce. In the front room, a single lamp threw warm light onto the desk where Martha sat, pen poised over crisp stationery. The day had been filled with cheerful chaos, neighbors dropping by to check on Sonny, Atlas patiently enduring a line of children eager to stroke his fur, a final rehearsal for the park dedication set for tomorrow morning. Now the house was still. Atlas lay at Martha's feet, body stretched out, eyes following her every move. Sunny, finally worn out from her latest adventure, snored quietly in her dog bed, paws twitching with dreams. Martha glanced at them both, the corners of her mouth lifting in a smile laced with memory and bittersweet hope. She began to write. To the Cedar Falls community, my neighbors, my friends, and the family Daniel loved. She paused, letting the silence settle, then glanced at Atlas. The big shepherd shifted closer, laying his head on her slippered foot, sighing as if he could carry the world's weight for her. Martha stroked his ear with her free hand. The simple comfort steadied her. I have tried a dozen times to find the right words. I don't know if they exist. But after everything, I feel I owe you the truth. Not just about Daniel, but about what has happened to us all. Losing someone you love can make you want to close your heart forever. For a while I thought I would. But then Atlas, and then Sunny reminded me, love, once given, does not die. It transforms. It finds new ways to serve, protect, and heal. Her pen hovered over the page as she watched Sunny's gentle breathing. The puppy had become a symbol in town, of hope, of luck, of Daniel's sacrifice. But for Martha, she was simply family now. She remembered the first terrible days after Daniel's death, when every knock at the door sent her heart racing, and the ache of loneliness was a constant, dull ache. What changed it? She looked at Atlas for her answer. The big dog's loyalty had become her anchor. He'd mourned Daniel in his own wordless way, howling at the bedroom door, refusing food for days, finally settling in the hallway where Daniel's boots still stood. It was Atlas's steadfastness that kept Martha moving, reminding her every morning to open the door, to feed him, to keep going even when all she wanted was to give in to grief. And then Sunny arrived, a fragile spark, unexpected and almost lost. Nursing the puppy through her fevers and fears, Martha felt her own wounds begin to close, not because they were forgotten, but because they were shared. She kept writing, her hand trembling only a little. I have watched Atlas mourn. I have watched him refuse to leave Sunny's side, night after night, even when we believed she would not make it. That kind of loyalty cannot be taught. It comes from love and the memory of kindness. Atlas taught me that when you lose something precious, the only way through is to care for something else, to bear witness, to refuse to turn away from pain. Outside, the wind stirred the branches of the old oak in the yard, sending shadows flickering across the walls. Martha thought of all the ways the town had changed, of neighbors stopping to help each other, children leaving notes and flowers by the park, the animal rescue flooded with offers to foster and adopt. Daniel's story, and Atlas's, had become more than a tragedy. It was a call to action, a reminder that even the smallest acts could ripple out, changing everything. She set down the pen, reading over her words, then added more. Daniel broke rules to save a life. He wasn't reckless, he was compassionate. Sometimes the right thing isn't the easy thing, or even the safe thing, but it's the thing you do because your heart demands it. Atlas's desperate howl, his refusal to accept that all was lost, and Grace's willingness to listen, to really listen, changed everything. They reminded me, and all of us, that bearing witness to suffering, refusing to look away, is a kind of courage. Martha paused, heart heavy but full. Atlas shifted, pressing closer. She spoke softly, her words meant for the two dogs as much as for herself. We honor Daniel best by carrying his kindness forward, don't we? Not by building monuments, but by loving, by never giving up on a life that needs us. She remembered Grace standing alone at the funeral, willing to become an outcast to trust Atlas's cry. She remembered Daniel's stubborn hope, his belief that no life was too small to matter. She remembered her own bitterness, fading now in the gentle company of two dogs who asked only to love and be loved. Tomorrow, we will gather at the new park to remember Daniel, Atlas, and all the animals who serve beside us. I hope we can also remember what they taught us, that healing is not forgetting, but transforming. That family is not just blood, but who we choose to care for. That the greatest courage is to see someone else's pain and not turn away. She signed her name, folded the letter, and set it aside for the morning. Then, blinking back tears, Martha read the letter aloud. Her voice was rough but true. We honor Daniel not just with words or monuments, but by carrying his kindness forward, by listening, by loving, and by never giving up on a life that needs us. As she finished, Atlas nosed her hand, and Sunny, half awake, rolled to her back in a gesture of total trust. Martha smiled through her tears. Tomorrow they would go together to the park. But tonight, in the quiet house filled with loss and love, Martha knew Daniel's story was not just an ending, it was the beginning of a lesson Cedar Falls would never forget. Dawn broke clean and bright over Cedar Falls on the morning of the park dedication. The town seemed to wake with a sense of quiet anticipation. Storefronts swept, front doors open, the air sweet with the scent of fresh-cut grass and sun-warmed earth. For the first time in a long while, the streets buzzed with laughter that wasn't forced, with hope that didn't feel like denial. Birds wheeled above the new park, their calls sharp and joyful in the golden light. Martha Walker arrived early, Sunny trotting at her side, Atlas calm and dignified, every step deliberate. She paused at the edge of the wide green space, letting the moment wash over her. Just months ago, this ground had been nothing but an empty lot, choked with weeds and shadowed by the memory of loss. Now, flowers lined the winding paths, children's voices echoed from the playground, and the new bronze statue, Daniel kneeling beside Atlas and Sunny, caught the sun and threw it back in gentle brilliance. Grace stood near the memorial, hands in her jacket pockets, her face unreadable in the morning glare. When she saw Martha, a smile flickered across her lips, not wide, not easy, but real. She knelt to greet Atlas, who pressed his broad head into her chest, and then Sunny, who spun in delighted circles, tail wagging furiously. "Ready?" Grace asked quietly. Martha nodded, her voice soft but certain. He would have loved this. As the park filled, neighbors gathered with picnic blankets and folding chairs, teachers and students in clusters, officers in dress blues mingling with families and volunteers. The mayor stood by the microphone, flipping note cards nervously, but there was no sense of ceremony, just community. Atlas was the unofficial grand marshal, leading a slow parade as children tossed tennis balls and clapped, parents waving and laughing. Even Sunny, once so timid, bounded from group to group, basking in the attention. The ceremony began under a canopy of sycamore trees, sunlight dappling faces and the stone path. Grace took the podium, her voice carrying easily in the hush. "Today," she began, "we dedicate Walker Atlas Park, not just to Daniel and Atlas, but to every act of compassion that has changed our town. We think heroes wear badges or uniforms, but sometimes they walk on four legs or come in the form of a child's hug or a kind word when it's needed most. Atlas taught me, and all of us, that real courage is caring even when it's hard and loving when it hurts." She paused, meeting the eyes of people who had become more than neighbors, who had become, in these months of grief and healing, a family. We all lost something when Daniel died, but what we've built together since then, This park, this community, these new bonds, is proof that loss can also be a beginning. Grace stepped aside, inviting Martha forward. Martha's hands trembled as she held Sonny, but her voice when it came was strong. "This park is a promise," Martha said, her eyes shining. "A promise to care for one another, to reach out when someone is hurting, to never turn away from the small or the lost." Daniel believed in second chances. Atlas and Sonny showed us how powerful those can be. She glanced down at the puppy in her arms, who wriggled and licked her chin. The crowd laughed, a gentle, communal sound that washed away the last shadows of sorrow. As the speeches ended, people shared stories about dogs rescued, friendships rekindled, neighbors checked on during storms. The mayor announced the start of a new town initiative. Every graduating class would sponsor an animal at the shelter, and retired canines would have a permanent home in Cedar Falls. Grace watched as children swarmed Atlas and Sonny, laughter ringing out beneath the trees. She let herself step back from the crowd, sitting on a low stone wall near the statue, letting the memories flow. Daniel's crooked grin, his terrible jokes, the way Atlas used to nudge her hand when she got lost in paperwork. For the first time, those memories were sweet instead of sharp. She found herself thinking about family, the one you're born into and the one you choose. Martha had chosen to heal by loving again. Grace had chosen to stay to help this town build something new. Atlas and Sonny had chosen each other, instinctively forming a pack that welcomed anyone willing to hope. As the sun rose higher, casting the park in a golden glow, Grace took the microphone one last time. "If this story moved you," she said, voice steady, "please like and follow our channel. Remember, no act of kindness is wasted. No voice is too small to be heard. Be willing to see, to listen, and to love, because you never know whose life you might save." She stepped down, her heart full, her grief transformed by the simple, stubborn acts of love she'd witnessed. At the base of Daniel's tree, Atlas settled, watching the world with calm wisdom. Sonny curled up beside him, her eyes drifting shut in the safety of home. Martha joined Grace on the bench, sharing a quiet, contented silence as the community they'd built together unfolded before them. Above the park, the sky brightened with promise, the next sunrise more beautiful than any before. In Cedar Falls, stories of loss and loyalty would echo for years, shaping lives in ways no one could predict. And as long as Atlas and Sonny watched over the park, as long as laughter rang beneath the trees and kindness was given without expectation, Daniel's legacy, and the healing that followed, would live on.